This is the day Kody Brown never thought would come. The air in the courtroom was weighty, heavy with the sort of tension that causes people to breathe softly. Every available seat was filled, reporters with notepads at the ready, camera crews fiddling with tripods, and curious locals leaning forward as if they were about to see the season finale of a soap opera they'd been watching for years. Outside, the soft whir of TV cameras filtered in each time the heavy oak doors swung open, commingling with the subdued hum of rumor within. In front of it all, Kody Brown sat at the defendant's table. His previously unruly, lion-haired locks were now pulled tightly back, but he still exuded that same impenetrable confidence he did on Sister Wives. He sat back in his chair, legs slightly apart, one arm on the table, the other carelessly slung over the back of his chair. That smug smile, the smile that once beguiled his wives and enraged his detractors, was smeared on his face like it was all just another sit-down interview. But this wasn't an interview on TV. This was a trial. And this time, the script wasn't his. The double doors at the rear of the courtroom burst open with a rush that hushed the murmured conversation. A tide of flashbulbs from outside flashed momentarily blind before unloading Meri Brown into the doorway. She wasn't crying. She wasn't seeking sympathy. She wasn't the Meri that viewers had once sympathized with on TV, the woman meekly sitting in the shadows as Kody's focus wandered elsewhere. No, this Meri was different. This Meri was preparing for battle. Her black blazer was fitted to perfection, cutting enough to shave glass. There was a solitary gold pendant against her chest, reflecting the light. She held a chunky folder. It was stamped in large red letters. Confidential. Evidence, the type of tag that makes even the most hardened lawyers sit up in their chairs. Gasps made their way through the crowd. They leaned to the side to whisper to one another. What's in that folder? Is it legitimate? Can it bring him down? Kody's grin didn't fade instantly. He was too proud for that. But there was the tiniest twitch at the corner of his mouth. His eyes narrowed, flicking from the folder to Meri's eyes and back again. He knew that look. This wasn't just a stunt. She had something. Meri made her way slowly up the aisle to the front, her heels clicking with each step in the hushed room. She never even glanced in the direction of the reporters. Her gaze remained fixed on Kody, like the rest of the world did not exist. The judge looked up from the bench. Mrs. Brown, sit down. Meri didn't sit down right away. She halted next to her attorney, set the confidential file on the table, and rested her open hand on it, nearly protectively. Then, in a voice that carried to the front rows, and certainly loud enough for the microphones, she declared, "This is going to ruin you, Kody." It wasn't a scream. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, composed. And for some reason, that made it even more intimidating. A quick gasp came from the rear of the courtroom. People did actually applaud before the bailiff gave them a glare that could freeze magma. The cameras snapped frantically. Somebody somewhere close to the entrance whispered into their phone, already typing out a headline. Kody straightened up, leaning forward now, smugness starting to crumble. "What do you mean, Meri?" he said, his voice a trifle too defensive. Her lips smiled into a faint curve. "Oh, you'll find out." The judge slammed the gavel once. "Order, we will have order in this court." But order was lost. No matter how many times the gavel fell, the tension had already been broken. The members of the jury fidgeted in their seats, intrigued. The pens of the reporters moved quicker, and every single individual in that room was aware. Something explosive was going to happen. A closer look at the room. The courthouse was itself an old one, constructed in the late 1800s, and its age was reflected in dark wood paneling and brass hardware. Dust motes drifted slowly through the air where sunlight found a way in through tall, thin windows. On one table, the prosecution's was piled high with binders, post-it notes protruding like flags. Across from them, Kody's defense team, 3 men in suits and 1 keen-eyed woman, huddled together, muttering furiously now that Meri had come armed with her enigmatic folder. The gallery was a sea of faces. Christine and Janelle were conspicuously absent, at least for the moment, but some distant relatives had made the trek. And then there were the fans. Those who had seen the Browns on television for years, who had rooted for Meri when she finally departed, and who now regarded her as some sort of avenging angel. The second before it all begins. The judge fumbled with some documents and shifted his glasses. "Let's begin opening arguments," he declared. But Meri was not gazing at him. Her eyes were still trained on Kody. And in that instant, the burden of history between them was nearly tangible in the air. Years of collective secrets, public battles masquerading as family debates, and secret betrayals that never crossed the frames of the TLC cameras. Kody leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something too low to catch, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the table. This was supposed to be his world, his stage. But for the first time it felt like someone else had taken control of the script. And judging by the steel in Meri's eyes, she wasn't planning on giving it back. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. "Proceed, prosecution." Meri's attorney, Alicia Grant, stood up from her chair with the sort of confidence that comes when you know you hold the ace. Tall and angular-faced, dressed in a suit of navy, so pale it seemed chiseled from ice itself, she advanced until she stood between the jury and Kody Brown. She did not glance at him. Not yet. She made him sit there fidgeting, while she spoke to the room. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Alicia started, her tone honey-like but loaded. "This is not a divorce case. This is not a dispute over assets. This case is about betrayal. A betrayal so profound, so calculated, that it destroyed not only a marriage, but a family." She looked over, pointing at Meri, who was sitting with folded hands, looking intently at the folder in front of her. "My client, Mrs. Meri Brown, devoted decades of her life to a man who vowed trust, unity and honesty. What did she receive? Was deceit, greed, and a calculated scheme to take away everything she toiled for." From behind the defense table, Kody released a laugh, a brief slashing scoff that was intended to brush her aside. But Alicia didn't blink. She merely turned her face toward him, one eyebrow arched, before refocusing on the jury. "In the months leading up to this marriage imploding," Alicia went on, "Kody Brown started moving huge family monies. Monies not only his, but of all his wives, into accounts only in the name of his fourth wife, Robin Brown. He didn't seek permission. He didn't even provide notice. He took it in stealth, draining the assets out, so when the dust had settled, the other wives, including Meri, would be left with zero." She strode over to the evidence table and lifted the first pile of documents. "Bank statements," she indicated, waving them in the jury's direction. "Multi-transfers, high-dollar amounts, dates corresponding with pivotal events in the disintegration of the family." On the projector screen, the figures flashed: $50,000, $120,000, $350,000. Whispers surged through the gallery. Even the court reporter hesitated for a half-second before coming back at it. "This," Alicia explained, gesturing to one of the transfers on March 14th, "was the next day after my client had argued with Mr. Brown regarding his increasingly obvious bias in favor of Robin. This," she glided to another date in April, "was the morning my client learned that certain shared accounts had been frozen without her permission." A hand rose from the defense table. "Objection," Kody's attorney, Mark Sullivan, barked. "Circumstantial. These transfers could have been for any number of reasons." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Overruled. Continue, Miss Grant." Alicia nodded, speaking again to the jury. "You will hear the defense try to tell you that these transfers were routine, that they were for business. But when you look at the pattern, the amounts, the timing, and the secrecy, you will know this wasn't business. This was an intentional act of financial erasure." Kody finally broke his silence, leaning forward toward the microphone before him. "She's bitter," his words rang out across the room. "She's angry because I moved on and left her behind." The judge's gavel came down. "Mr. Brown, you will be called to speak when your time comes. Sit down." Kody sat back, grumbling under his breath, but the jury's attention was now on him, fixed on the way his jaw muscles worked, the way his fingers drummed anxiously on the table. The visual bombshell: Alicia did not solely depend on figures. Alicia realized that the jury had to witness the betrayal. She touched her remote, and a new picture appeared on the screen. A pie chart of the family's finances prior to the transfers. The biggest slice was marked Family Joint Account. Prior, Alicia explained, clicking once more. The chart changed, and now almost 70% of the money was in one account marked Robin Brown, sole owner. Gasps were heard from the courtroom gallery. Robin, who sat in the row just behind Kody, shifted restlessly, her eyes flicking toward the door for a fraction of a second too long. This wasn't an accident, Alicia declared. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. This was a deliberate attempt to cut my client out entirely. A moment of silence hung in the air. The jury's eyes traveled from the chart to Meri, and then back to Kody. Kody's attempt to counter Mark Sullivan. Kody's lawyer rose. Your Honor, may the court hear me. The judge nodded. Ladies and gentlemen, Sullivan started. You are being told half of the story, a tale that I will admit is gripping, but one that is also designed to paint my client as a villain. The reality is, these transfers were proper. Mr. Brown was rolling accounts for tax reasons, and to secure the investments of the family. There was no theft, no fraud, simply sound financial practice. Kody leaned into the microphone. And let's be real, Meri's only here because she wants to punish me for moving on. This isn't about money, it's about revenge. A few members of the jury raised their eyebrows at the word revenge. The tension in the air grew heavier. Alicia advanced once more, her words piercing the din. Revenge? Is that how you define defending what belongs to her? Is that how you define combat for decades of service to a family she fought to build from scratch? The evidence drops like a bomb. Alicia opened the confidential evidence folder with a calculated movement. The shuffling of paper against paper sounded like thunder in the silence. She extracted one sheet and handed it to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. Your Honor, Exhibit B, she stated. An email chain between Mr. Brown and his private financial consultant, dated 2 weeks prior to the first big transfer. The judge read quietly, his brow furrowing. Then he addressed Kody. Mr. Brown, this letter appears to indicate that you told your advisor to, and I quote, transfer the funds into Robin's name before anyone gets smart. Care to respond? Kody turned red in the face. He looked at Sullivan, who was already standing up. Objection. We challenge the validity of this letter. The judge placed the paper on the desk. Noted, authenticity will be decided by the jury. Go on. But it was too late. The phrase before anyone gets wise was already seared into the brains of everyone in the room. The weight of the room shifts. Kody, for the first time since the hearing started, appeared, trapped. His eyes flicked between the judge, the jury, and Meri, who remained absolutely still, her expression inscrutable. Alicia moved closer to him. Mr. Brown, your client trusted you. She believed in the integrity of your family. And while she was keeping the family together in front of people, you were breaking it up behind closed doors. She faced the jury again. When you see the entire picture of the evidence, you'll understand that this case is not about jealousy. It's not about bitterness. It's about the truth. And the truth is, Kody Brown betrayed the very people he said he loved, for one reason and one reason only: control. The judge requested a short recess, and the courtroom burst into murmurs. As the bailiff escorted the jury out, Kody leaned over the table toward Sullivan. His voice was low but biting. We need to close this thing down before she gets the rest of them out here. But 2 rows back from him, Robin sat with her eyes on the floor, her lips pursed into a tight line. She didn't glance at him. She didn't glance at anyone, because in her mind she knew this was only the start. When the judge's gavel brought the court back to order after recess, the atmosphere in the room was altered. Individuals whispered among themselves. The jury walked in one by one, glancing at Meri and Kody, some attempting to decide who seemed more credible. Kody had his strut back, or at least he wanted the world to believe so. He leaned over to his lawyer, whispering and grimacing, every now and again as if they had just come up with some sly method to dismantle Meri's case. But the occasional flicker of a twitch in his jaw gave him away. The judge cleared his throat. Defense, you may proceed. Kody's lawyer, Mark Sullivan, stood up and walked towards the jury box. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to remind you that we still have not heard any conclusive evidence that my client did anything wrong. What we have here is a story. Well told, I might add, but still just a story. And as with any story, there's always another side. He spoke to turn towards Meri. Mrs. Brown has a very long history of disagreements with my client, And whereas those disagreements are probably legitimate, they do not add up to criminal activity. Meri did not blink. She just sat quietly, one hand placed lightly on the confidential evidence folder. Sullivan went on. In fact, we have evidence that these financial transfers were routine and signed off by members of the family. Kody leaned toward the microphone. That's right, everyone knew about it. This is just Meri's attempt to get back at me, because she can't stand the fact that I'm happy with Robin now. A few muffled gasps came from the gallery. Robin, sitting stiffly 2 rows behind Kody, stared down at her hands. Sullivan smoothed his tie. We'd like to call our first witness. Someone who can shed light on the family's finances. The defense's witness, who never made it to the stand. The defense's plan was simple. Call a mutual acquaintance, who would testify that the transfers were above board. But just as Sullivan was about to call the witness, Alicia Grant stood from the prosecution's table. Her voice was calm, almost casual. Your Honor, prior to calling anyone on the defense, the prosecution would like to present a rebuttal witness who has just come in. We feel their testimony will greatly change the court's perception of the defendant's conduct. The judge pushed his glasses up his nose. Are you prepared to have this witness go now? Alicia smiled weakly. Yes, Your Honor. The double doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. For a split second, the sound of shouting reporters from outside broke through before the bailiff closed them again. And then, Christine Brown walked in. The room went silent. Christine takes the stand. Kody's face drained of color. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered under his breath. Christine walked with measured steps, her chin high, her eyes fixed on the judge. She didn't glance at Kody, didn't acknowledge him at all, as she was sworn in. Alicia stepped forward. Please state your name for the record. Christine Ruth Brown, she said, her voice steady. And what is your relation to the defendant? I was his third wife for over 25 years. Alicia nodded. Mrs. Brown, throughout your marriage, did you ever hear about financial talks between Kody Brown and his fourth wife, Robin Brown? Christine's lips pursed for a moment before she answered. Yes, many times. Can you tell us more? Christine looked over at the jury quickly before responding. I've overheard several conversations in which Kody indicated he wanted to streamline the family finances, which in his lingo meant that he wanted to relocate the money so that he and Robin would be the only ones with access to it. The words he used more than once were, once they're out, we keep it all. Gasps filled the gallery. The fingers of the court reporter moved rapidly across the keys. Kody leaped from his chair. That's not true. She's misrepresenting me. The judge struck the gavel. Sit down, Mr. Brown. The recording. Alicia dug into her briefcase and produced a miniature digital recorder. Mrs. Brown, do you know what this is? Christine nodded. Yes, I recorded one of our conversations the night Kody informed me he was through with the other wives and wanted to devote himself exclusively to Robin. Alicia stood up and addressed the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution would like permission to play a short excerpt of this recording. The judge nodded. Proceed. The bailiff brought the recorder to the sound system, and soon Kody's voice filled the courtroom. The sound was gritty but audible. Once they're out, we keep it all. No more dividing it 4 ways. It'll be you and me, Robin, and the others can look after themselves. The silence that ensued was deafening. The jury glared at Kody, some eyebrows upraised, others' eyes narrowed. Robin went ghost pale. Kody attempted to say something, but Alicia jumped in before he had a chance. Mr. Brown, is this your voice on the tape? Kody's eyes flitted to his lawyer. It's been edited. She's fabricating. Christine leaned forward, her tone icy. No editing. That's precisely what you said. Word for word. The emotional impact. Alicia walked slowly, allowing tension to mount. Mrs. Brown, how did you feel when you heard him say that? Christine inhaled deeply. It was as if the ground gave way under me. We constructed this family together. We gave up things. We worked. And to hear him say it like that, as though we were just things he had to get over, it shattered something in me. She gazed at Meri, and there was a brief moment where the 2 women locked eyes with a weight of mutual background. I moved out shortly after that, but I preserved the recording because I knew someday, the truth would be important. The defense, in a state of panic. Mark Sullivan jumped to his feet. Objection. This is hearsay and has no bearing on the financial transactions before us. The judge shook his head. Overruled. The tape addresses directly the issue of intent. Kody pounded his hand on the table. This is a witch hunt. You're all ganging up on me because I chose Robin. None of you can handle that. I wanted a legitimate marriage rather than living in misery with 3 women who didn't care about me. The tirade made matters worse. A few jurors shifted in their seats uncomfortably. One even hastily scribbled something on their notebook, looking at Kody with obvious disapproval. The power shift when Christine left the stand. The mood in the courtroom had totally flipped. Kody no longer appeared invincible. The superior smugness had ruptured, replaced by barely suppressed ire. Robin deliberately sidestepped his eye contact, gazing instead at the grain pattern on the back of the seat before her. Meri, who remained quiet, kept her hand rested on that folder. She hadn't played her ace card even yet, and everyone knew it. Alicia addressed the judge. Your Honor, we have further evidence to submit, but for the time being, we rest this aspect of the case. The judge indicated, and with the bailiff calling the next steps in procedure, the whispers resumed. Outside in the hallway, reporters hurried to phone their editors. Some were already typing. Kody Brown testifies. Once they're out, we keep it all. Within, Kody sat frozen, his eyes fixed on the table. For the first time in all the trial's duration, he resembled a man who realized he was capable of losing. The courtroom hummed with agitated whispers following Christine's departure. Even the judge paused to take a sip of water and rustle through his papers, as if he had to compose himself after what was just revealed. Kody sat rigidly at the defense table, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on some intangible point in midair. He didn't look over at Meri. He didn't even glance at Christine, now sitting quietly in the spectator section, and he definitely didn't look at Robin, stuck in her seat 2 rows back of him, hands wrapped around each other in her lap, as if she were holding on for dear life. The judge cleared his throat. Prosecution, you may proceed. Alicia Grant rose to her feet. There was no haste in her movements, no excess energy. She was aware that the momentum was now hers. She could feel the jury inclining toward her side of the room. She took up the confidential evidence folder. Your Honor, she started. What we're going to put forward will not only substantiate Mrs. Kody Brown's evidence but clear any doubt that Mr. Brown's actions were deliberate and with malicious intent. Kody fidgeted in his seat. Objection in advance. His lawyer grumbled. The judge arched an eyebrow. You can't object if you don't hear it, Mr. Sullivan. The trap springs. Alicia pulled out the folder and extracted a small pile of printed documents. These, she added, are exchanges between Mr. Brown's financial advisor, Mr. David Larkin, and Mr. Brown himself. They are from the weeks leading up to the initial big transfer. The bailiff gave copies to the judge, defense, and jury. Please focus your attention, Alicia went on the March 2nd email, which has a timestamp of 11:47 p.m. The jurors eyed the page. Some of them could be seen bristling. It was a brief passage, just 1 sentence, but it had nuclear power. Once the others are out of the way, move everything to Robin's account before anyone notices. A shocked gasp rang from the gallery. Kody's attorney stood at once. Your Honor, we continue to claim these emails are faked. Alicia barely glanced at him. Irony, because these emails came straight from Mr. Larkin's own email account after he had followed a subpoena. The judge's face set. Is that your email address, Mr. Brown? Kody paused. Yes, but I didn't send it. Alicia leaned forward very slightly. So someone broke into your account, typed that same sentence, and it just so happened to be something similar to a statement you were caught on tape making to your 3rd wife. Kody's eyes narrowed. Exactly. A few of the jurors snickered at the ridiculousness of it. Turning up the heat, Alicia didn't let up. She mentioned bank statements again, this time showing a suspicious $15,000 withdrawal from a joint account that showed just 1 day after that email. The funds had been transferred into an account in Robin's name only. Then there were screenshots of text messages between Kody and Robin. Kody, nearly there. Once this final move is done, it's just you and I. Robin, I know. Don't believe it's actually happening. The jury was now physically responding, some leaning back in their chairs, others shaking heads. Meri, still being quiet, sat observing Kody like an animal watching prey that's just caught on their trap. Kody loses his cool, and then Alicia turned to him. Mr. Brown, can you tell the court why all of your private communications, emails, texts, and a recorded phone call feature the same statement? Once they're out, we keep it all. Coincidence? Kody's voice grew loud. You're twisting this. Those words were taken out of context. Then provide us the context. Alicia retorted. They were jokes, he snarled. Half the time I was venting about how tough it was to juggle 4 relationships. Anyone who's lived my life would know. Objection. Your Honor, Alicia interrupted. We're not here to debate the defendant's personal lifestyle. We're here to talk about his white-collar crimes. Objection sustained, the judge replied. Mr. Brown, please confine your answers to the questions posed. Kody glared at the judge. Perhaps I would, if the questions weren't leading. The judge's gavel came crashing down. One more interruption, Mr. Brown, and I'll hold you in contempt. The knife twists. Now that Kody's temper had been put on full display, Alicia went in for the kill. Your Honor, based on this evidence, the prosecution respectfully asks for a freeze on all of Mr. Brown's assets as soon as possible, to avoid further dispositions during the pendency of this trial. The judge addressed the defense. Mr. Sullivan. Sullivan's voice was strained. We object. This is premature, and would impose undue hardship. Alicia's voice did not change. The only difficulty in this case is the one my client faced when she awoke to discover decades' worth of her work and contributions stripped from her in an instant. The judge rocked back in his chair, considering the request. The silence dragged long enough for the tension to build again. At last he spoke. Based on the amount of evidence so far, I am approving the prosecution's request. Everything Mr. Brown owns needs to be frozen immediately until the results of this trial are known. The courtroom burst into outraged whispers. Robin clapped her hand over her mouth. Kody's eyes went wide. What? You can't do that. It's done, the judge announced bluntly. The quiet revenge. As the courtroom responded, Meri inched closer to Christine, standing in the gallery. Her voice was low, addressed solely to Christine, but the slightest flicker of a smile danced on her lips. Step 1. Meri breathed. Christine cocked her head. Step 1. Meri's gaze swept around to Kody, now furiously arguing with his attorney. Oh, I'm not doing this for the money. I want the truth on every headline. I want all the secrets brought to the light of day. This is only the first step. Christine smiled. Remind me never to cross you. Kody's desperation shows. As the hearing concluded for the day, Kody sat still for a good long while. His fingers wrapped so hard around the table they turned white. Reporters were already assembling outside, anxious to strike. Robin leaned over and put her hand on his shoulder, but he shook it off without even glancing at her. For the first time, he did not walk out with his usual swagger. He stood up slowly, shoulders laden, as if the burden of the frozen assets had fallen flat on his back. When at last he glanced in the direction of Meri, she was already standing by the door, talking softly to Alicia, and in her eyes was something a great deal more ominous than rage. It was patience, because Meri knew the actual revenge was yet to come. The last day of the trial started under a heavy gray sky, as if the weather itself were in on something historic. The courthouse steps were invaded. Cameras, microphones, and enthused reporters yelling questions in the din. Inside, tension was nearly intolerable. The jury had been deliberating for 2 full days, and the longer it dragged on, the more the room's energy shifted between hope and dread. Meri sat at the plaintiff's table, composed but unreadable. Alicia leaned close and whispered, "Whatever happens, you've already won in the court of public opinion." Meri didn't look away from the vacant jury seats. "I didn't come here to care about what people think," she whispered. "I came for the truth." The jury returns at 10:42 a.m. The bailiff's voice cut through the tension. Jury is ready to return with a verdict. Everyone stood up as the 12 jurors came in, their expressions guarded. The foreperson was standing, grasping a folded piece of paper.
The judge nodded. Madam Foreperson, did the jury find a unanimous verdict? Yes, Your Honor. Please read it.
She unfolded the paper. In the case of Meri Brown versus Kody Brown, on the charge of fraudulent misappropriation of funds, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Gasps run through the gallery. Kody's teeth gritted, his face a picture of shock. Robin's hand went to her mouth once more, but this time there were no tears to keep hidden in her eyes. The foreperson went on. In the issue of emotional distress and intentional breach of trust, we find the defendant liable. Meri didn't blink. No smile, no sigh, only deep breaths, as if she'd known all along this would happen. The sentence shock. The judge rustled papers and then spoke to the courtroom. Considering the seriousness of the abuse and the deliberate extent of these actions, this court mandates the immediate transfer of all frozen funds to a restitution fund controlled by the court. These monies will be paid to the plaintiffs in proportion to verifiable losses. Kody sprang up. You can't take it all away from me. The judge's gavel came crashing down. Sit down. But the punch stopped there. In addition, Mr. Brown, with the aggravating circumstances of this case, you are hereby sentenced to 18 months in federal custody with 2 years probation thereafter. The room fell silent, except for the rustling of pens writing furiously in reporters' notebooks. Kody's attorney whispered something under his breath to him, but his face had turned white. The public unraveling outside. It traveled like wildfire. The social media was abuzz with hashtags. #Justice for Meri, #Brown Empire Falls, #Karma for Kody. Footage of his rants in court was shared online, interspersed with news of his conviction. By the time the bailiffs led him out in handcuffs, the crowd outside was chanting Meri's name. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing the moment the man who once boasted of control over multiple households was reduced to a single chain between his wrists. The whisper but the most unforgettable moment didn't happen on camera. As Kody was being led past the plaintiff's table, Meri stepped slightly forward. The bailiffs didn't stop her. There was no hostility in her movement, just a calm, deliberate presence. She leaned in just enough for only him to hear. Her voice was low, steady, almost gentle. This wasn't revenge, Kody. This was mercy. If I'd told everything, you'd never see daylight again. Kody stood stock still, his eyes flicking to hers in search of a glimmer of bluff. But all he saw was the firm cool of someone who'd emerged victorious without having to dismantle. Bailiffs pulled him along, and he lurched into the doorway, the chains clanking on his wrists. Aftermath. Christine stood in the doorway, just beyond the courtroom. She hugged Meri hard, both women clinging a fraction longer than they needed to. You did it, Christine whispered. No, Meri said, looking toward the door where Kody had just vanished. I ended it. The two women stepped out together, through the horde of reporters paying no attention to any yelped question. The last image that evening, a photo went viral. Meri and Christine walking arm in arm into the drab dawn, their faces serene, their heads held high, no victorious grins, no gloating. Just two women who'd lived through the same tempest, and finally entered into the clean air on the other side. And hours away in a holding cell, somewhere, Kody sat in silence, repeating her whisper again and again in his head. Understanding the most terrifying part wasn't what she'd done, it was what she'd left undone.